Hello and welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, your daily dose of simple, relevant and UPSC focused current affairs. It's August 21st and today we have two important themes for your mains preparation. First, we take a look at India-Japan Maritime Security Pact and what it means for India's maritime security and wider Indo-Pacific region. Then we discuss the draft rules under the SHANTI Act and their implications for India's nuclear energy sector. We also bring you mains value addition materials to help you enrich your answers with useful facts, examples and case studies. And finally, for your prelims 2027, we have very important pointers on variety of topics. So finally, let us begin. Hello all, welcome back to Analyst. I hope all of you are doing well. I hope your preparation is also going fine, and I would take this opportunity to wish all my friends who are appearing for mains 2026 examination all the best and best of luck. Because the mains examination is starting today with the essay paper, and as you go on tomorrow with GS1 and GS2 and henceforth with the other papers, I hope that Almighty gives you the strength and coupled with your hard work you clear the mains examination and appear for interview to become the bureaucrat that you have always wished for. So with this, let us return to the Analyst here, because we have in the very first article the main topic of the Maritime Security Pact that we signed with Japan. So this is where in the broader context of your prelims and mains examination, where we have the topics of IR, bilateral agreements, and in GS paper 3 we have security challenges. Let us start with understanding why Japan and India are natural maritime partners. That is when we will be able to appreciate why we recently have signed a security pact. Firstly, appreciate the location of the two countries. Here we have our beloved India, here we have the country of Japan, where both of them are actually located on the central positions of their respective oceans. So here we have the Indian Ocean region, where India is actually located at the central position, right? On the other hand, Japan actually is located on the Pacific Ocean. Right? So this is where we have a confluence of these two oceans. That is why the broader region is also referred to as the Indo-Pacific region. And in recent times, due to the dominance of China and a variety of issues, this Indian Ocean region and the Pacific Ocean region is very important. So important that even the Western countries such as the US and the various other allies are interested in securing this particular area. Now, when we look into this map, let us try to appreciate the volume of trade that passes through this region. And when we talk about through this region, I'm talking about the point where Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean is at a confluence. Talk about this entire region where we have various straits. For example, Strait of Malacca, Sunda Strait, Lombok, and variety of straits. Let me actually give you one data that around 40%, in fact more than that, 40% of the global trade passes through this region. Why, if you may say? Because we have the Southeast Asian countries located in this region. We have China, who operates most of the ports alongside their own coastal side here. Also, we have the countries of Japan and Australia who also uses this particular region, due to which the Strait of Malacca and the other straits in this region can potentially face major future security challenges. And this is why like-minded nations such as India, Japan, Australia, even some of the Southeast Asian nations including Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, they are all concerned regarding the security of this entire oceanic region. And let me tell you guys, securing the oceans is not a very easy job, because most of the ocean waters are actually outside our own peripheral vision. That is why we need actually bigger cooperation. For example, when we talk about the entire security, we have to talk about involving satellites, ships, advanced submarines and various other security installations such as naval and maritime patrolling. So this is why Japan and India are actually natural maritime partners. Specifically, when we talk about the sea line of communications, if you look into these yellow dots here, we have the Strait of Hormuz in this region, right? And also the various Gulf countries, which actually supply a lot of crude oil. And those supplies are also passed on to the Southeast Asian nations and the rest of the world here. So this is why this region becomes highly important, right? Also, on a different level. We actually have a very long coastline. We have so many naval installations. Also, India is aspiring to become a shipbuilding hub and also defense manufacturing hub, which is why Japan can actually contribute a lot here. On the other hand, when we appreciate Japan's viewpoint, Japan is actually dependent on this region for their own maritime trade. So most of the semiconductors, electronic supplies and the variety of televisions, ACs that Japan's actually actively use this region for their trade. So there are n number of reasons as to why we both are actually very good defense partners, maritime security partners, right? And India and Japan actually goes back in the 1950s when we started our diplomatic relations for the first time. Now, over a period of time, Japan actually gave a lot of funds and capital to India for development assistance. That is known as Official Development Assistance Program of Japan. Say in the 1950s, Japan actually used to give India a lot of loans for developing our variety of sectors. Over a period of time in 1991, when we actually had the LPG reforms, Japan actually contributed a lot of foreign direct investment. Now, we actually had a setback in 1998 due to the Pokhran nuclear test, wherein Japan is actually a West-aligned country. And during that time, most of the Western countries condemned India for our nuclear test. But very soon, in 2000, in just 2 years, the relationship between Japan and India improved again, mainly by the visit of the Japanese premier in India. And also over a period of time, we have had so many visits. Now from 2007 onwards, the main agenda of Japan and India is to secure the Indo-Pacific region, because both of us actually share a lot of commonalities, right? And finally in 2014, our ties were elevated to that of a special strategic and global partnership, where we try to acknowledge the various amount of assistance which have been given by Japan, and also the various amount of trade and the market that is available in Japan for India too. Now, if you will be actually be also knowing this fact that under the official development assistance, the dedicated freight corridors, the bullet train project which is ongoing between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, alongside the setup of various metro stations and metro infrastructure in the country, is actually due to the various assistance provided by Japan, right? And also in the recent times, India and Japan share some mutual concern, that is China. We already know that China has been sending various military vessels, naval reconnaissance vessels in the Indian Ocean regions, even very close to Indian maritime waters. Now, the same issue has been going on between China and Japan in their own waters, right? So if you look at the East China Sea, in which China and Japan share their maritime borders, here there are various groups of islands. Mainly, famously, we have the Senkaku Island, which is actually disputed between Japan and China. So this is why we actually want to have a comprehensive maritime security pact, and this is where both of our defense ministers of the two countries have signed this pact. Now, it has to be noted on a side note that there have been various mention of the military exercises. These are the bilateral military exercises in which Japan and India participates with other countries also. For example, GMEX is one naval exercise between Japan and India. Dharma Guardian, here both of the armed forces from the army actually participated from India and Japan. Also, we have various other exercises such as Veer Guardian and Malabar exercise. In Malabar exercise, we also have the participation of the other Quad countries. In the comment section, let me know who are the other Quad countries apart from India and Japan. Now, when we talk about this entire Maritime Security Pact, we have one very simple idea. That idea is that the Indo-Pacific Ocean must be free and open. And what do you mean by free and open? That means that we already have appreciated the fact that this entire region is very important for global trade. So, even under WTO conventions, we understand that world trade must be unrestricted, right? This is why securing the maritime trade route is very important. So this is why the rule of law must be there in this entire region. No one should be choking the freedom of navigation of the major vessels, merchant vessels which are passing through this region. Because we have seen China has been investing a lot of money in this entire region. They have their own policy that is known as Belt and Road Initiative, wherein they mainly engage in debt trap diplomacy. What China does, China gives various loans at a very low interest rate to various countries, which are, for example, say Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and various other Southeast Asian countries also, because they want to invest or give loans to major ports in such countries. They also are doing the same strategy in Africa these days, where because of these Chinese loans, which are actually huge in number, sometimes these countries are not able to pay back. And what does China do in return? They simply take away the port, and then these ports become Chinese ports in other countries. So this is how on the land China is trying to encircle India and the various other countries actually with which China is actually hostile. So this is where we have to right now cooperate towards this free and open Indo-Pacific Ocean. Also, when we talk about this entire region, that this region is highly active in trade. So we have to also secure the economic prosperity. Also, peace and stability should be mentioned here. And finally, why India is also involved in all of these aspects? Because we have our broader maritime security agendas and developmental programs such as Mahasagar and Sagar initiatives, where we not only provide security in the region, but also provide development assistance to the various small island countries such as Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, and so many other small island nations in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is where we right now have to understand what are the main agreements in this 2026 Maritime Memorandum of Agreements. So firstly, India and Japan has agreed that both of the countries and their respective ships, it can be merchant vessels, it can be the defense installations also, where for repair and maintenance facilities, both of them can actually use their ports. Now this is a very important aspect. Imagine if there is one port which is actually in India, and for some reason some Japanese ship would require maintenance, right? So what would be the process if there is no agreement? Then the Japanese government has to talk with the consulates in India. Our Ministry of External Affairs will be involved. Then the External Affairs Ministry will be transferring the file to another ministry. Then that file will finally reach to the Ministry of Ports, and then finally some bureaucrat will be passing the order. So instead of doing this, for better trust and reciprocity, what we can do? We can simply sign an agreement that for these specific reasons, some ships and some designated vessels should not require any detailed agreements or say orders, right? Also, this is actually a very broader idea of promoting naval shipbuilding. India in the recent times want to become the global shipbuilding leader. And right now we have just started. This is why we need the technology, we need the various amount of funds which should come from Japan. And finally, we also have to appreciate the Japanese technical expertise. We already have heard about Japanese technical expertise, which is where we also want to involve their complex radio antenna, naval mast, and various systems. So this will be complex technology which will be serving as third eyes in the ocean. What they will do? These are actually complex set of various technology such as antenna, communication system, on-board radars, and satellite imagery. Alongside we have so many other technological aspects which Japan has already developed. So here Japan will be cooperating with us to provide that kind of vision so that we try to cover almost each and every inch of the Indian and the Pacific Oceans. Also here, we are trying to collaborate with Japanese organization that is known as ATLA. This is equivalent to DRDO in India. So you can already understand this is where Japanese advanced defense products are manufactured and designed. So we also have signed agreements with them so that technology transfer can happen. And also we are trying to cooperate on one very important and new emerging threat, that is the presence of sea mines. You know, it is just similar to the land mines that we see on movie, right? That if someone comes very close to these mines, they will explode. Similarly, this same concept was deployed in the recent Iran war, where Iran has been alleged to have equipped the entire Strait of Hormuz region, which is a maritime region, with sea mines. So we are also signing agreements to understand how we can counter those sea mines. Also, on the other hand, we are trying to have an entire maritime domain awareness using these antennas and cooperation with ATLA and DRDO. We are trying to devise these complex systems where we have collection and constellations of satellites, imagery, and various other aspects. Also, we will be having an undertaking to do specialized training of our special forces. And this is where, if you remember those exercises will be very handy, particularly when we talk about the armed forces. And finally, under the MOA, it has also been agreed that the report will be presented to the 4th 2+2 Foreign and Defense Ministerial Dialogue, which is actually going to take place very soon, where we have this security agreement with Japan, with US, with UK, with Australia, all of those stakeholders which are actually interested in securing the Indo-Pacific region. Now, when we talk about your mains examination, the examination can ask you questions on directly what are the various highlights of this agreement. Apart from that, if you want to get those additional marks, you also have to understand what more is needed. Now, when we talk about the way forward here, we have to understand that for security architecture of the Indo-Pacific region, we have to go more extra ways. Firstly, we have so many island developmental projects which are coming up. For example, we have the Great Nicobar Island project, where we are actually coming up with various installations in civil infrastructure and military infrastructure, where maybe we can have one convergence of the same with Japan across the Malacca Strait. Also, on the other hand, we have to appreciate one shortcoming of Japan is that after World War II, Japan's military architecture and philosophy is heavily tilting towards the US. So this is where we also have to cooperate with Japan and understand what the Article 9 of their constitution says, because according to Article 9 of Japanese constitution, there are some restrictions on Japan's military progress. So this is where Japan has to understand the present day realities of the Pacific Ocean. And this is where in the recent times we have seen that Japan is realizing that. Next, we also have to appreciate the fact that Japan's corporate sector is heavily in tie with the Chinese economy. And China uses this leverage sometimes to pressurize Japan. So herein, maybe this is an opportunity for India to deepen our corporate ties with Japanese corporate sector. Also, when we talk about the Quad framework, right? So here, not only with Japan, we have to diversify the same MOA that we discussed right now with the various other countries too, like Australia, and also have various comprehensive agreements with the US. Also, on the other hand, when we talk about the ISET, which is actually an initiative on critical and emerging technology, so here, this is one US and India partnership in the new technological spheres. This is where Japan can also have the same with India, right? With reference to joint defense innovation corridor, with reference to the various missiles, jets, and most importantly, the development of the Navy. This is where Japan can actually give a lot of expertise to us. So this was one comprehensive discussion on this kind of military agreement. Now let us practice this question and move on to the next one, where here we will discuss what are the new draft rules which have been framed under the SHANTI Act. And this topic is highly crucial for your prelims and mains topic of infrastructure. So let us start with understanding a very brief history of India's nuclear sector. Firstly, appreciate the fact that as of February 2026, we have 8,780 installed capacity in megawatts when we talk about the nuclear sector. So now, if we zoom out this is only 1.8% of India's total energy installation in the country. So this means that we are actually using very less nuclear energy. Despite so many investments coming from various states such as Bihar, Jharkhand and various other states which are actually coming up with, detailed projects such as Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. On the other hand, in India, there is an increasing demand of AI data centers, which require 24 into 7 uninterrupted power supply. This is where right now we are talking about our nuclear energy sector. This is why in the recent times also we have passed this SHANTI Act. Now before we go to this act, let us understand what existed before that act. Now in India we had this Atomic Energy Act of 1962, which empowered only the central government for any kind of nuclear plants, installations or nuclear enrichment with reference to nuclear fuel and various other parts and subparts of the nuclear power plant. Everything was under the state monopoly or the central government's monopoly. Now, over a period of time, since we actually had various nuclear accidents in the world, so in 2010 we actually came up with the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act. Now understand this very carefully. Now whenever we face some nuclear accidents, that accident can generally be sometimes unpredictable. Sometimes that accident can be due to the fault of the nuclear plant employees. Sometimes that accident can be caused by the fuel supplier, right? So based on that, in the nuclear sector we have two kind of liabilities. One is the operational liability, which means the operating of the nuclear plant and all the detailed procedures that take place. Second is the supplier liability. This is where the supplier, such as nuclear fuel supplier or uranium fuel supplier, or the various parts that are supplied by other parties, this is where they also come under liability if at all there will be any kind of nuclear accident. Now, in the developed world, most of the countries have operational liability. But in India, under this 2010 Act, we had both operational liability plus supplier liability. And this supplier liability was one of the main reasons due to which the private sector did not want to come and invest in India's nuclear energy sector. And this is why we are only at 1.8%. Alongside, there are various other reasons too. Now, before we move on to the Act, let us actually understand some of the key nuclear institutions which will be very important for your prelims. Now, apart from your prelims, this will be very useful for understanding what is coming up. So, in a very brief way, we have to appreciate that we have the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which is actually a PSU under the Department of Atomic Energy, which has the motto of atoms in the service of the nation, right? So, this is mainly concerned with development, modification, repair of the various state-run, central government-run nuclear power plants in the country. On the other hand, we have a non-statutory body. Please remember guys, you will need this later on. This is known as the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. This is actually India's highest safety regulator in nuclear technology plus nuclear energy. So based on the various reactors that we have, all the safety parameters are actually framed by the AERB, right? So this is actually an executive body, not a statutory body. So this has not been created by the parliament. Okay? Also, on the other hand, it reports to the Atomic Energy Commission, which is actually chaired by the Department of Atomic Energy's secretary. Okay? So this is what is the overall regulatory framework of nuclear energy. Please understand this very importantly for your exam. And finally, there are various quarters of the society and also the government of India which has proposed a body. Now note that this is a proposed body. This is not a body which exists as of now. This is known as Nuclear Energy Regulatory Development Council. So what it wants to do? It wants to shift the roles of these two organizations into this body, and it wants to back it with an act of the parliament so that it will be a statutory body, and it will be one very important body spearing the role of the nuclear energy in the country. Now, let us come to the Shanti Act right now. Now, this act was actually passed a few months back, wherein in the Analyst we talked about this act also. So let us actually revise what are the provisions so that we can understand the main pillars of the draft rules which actually was released yesterday. So firstly, we have allowed the private sector to operate nuclear power plants with reference to power generation, equipment manufacturing, refining, and even enrichment of uranium-235 nuclear fuel. Even when we talk about dealing with radiation exposure, everything right now almost will be handed to the private sector. Obviously, there will be very strict penalties, fines, provisions. So this is actually what is the internationally recognized standards. So it is not for the first time that India is only the first country to open the private sector to the nuclear energy sector, right? We have some countries in Europe, US, right, who have private firms operating the nuclear power plants. So we have basically tried to get inspired from them and try to do the same in our country. Also, when we talk about the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, remember this one, Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, it is right now a statutory body, right? So it is right now backed by the Shanti Act. Earlier it was not, right? So if we are trying to open up the nuclear energy sector to the private sector, there must be a particular law with reference to a regulatory body. That is why we did that. Also, when we talk about the liability framework, this is actually why most of the private sector will be interested to come in India and invest. Why? Because right now in India we have only operational liability. The supplier liability has been removed because the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act 2010 has been repealed. That act is no more. That is why supplier liability is also no more. And that is why many of the nuclear suppliers and so many other investors would be interested to come in India and invest in our nuclear sector. Right now, the liability clauses also have been set for the private firms. For example, for large firms, any unfortunate event or nuclear accident, right, we can see a liability up to 3,000 crore. For medium plants, it is 1,500 crore. And for small modular reactors, which I am going to discuss in the last slide, this year is liability is only 100. Now, apart from that, there should be a national nuclear liability fund. So, there can be some cases, some unfortunate cases of nuclear accidents where sometimes the total damage from the accident can cross these liability numbers. So that fund would be contributed by the central government, right? On the other hand, when we talk about the non-power applications, because so far when we talk about nuclear energy, we only talk about electricity, right? But obviously there are so many other sectors such as research and development, mainly for what? Mainly for radioactive medicines, because we know for the treatment of various cancer, we actually use nuclear technology to remove the cancerous cell. Apart from that, we also use nuclear energy for various other purposes, for example, research at universities, right, finding the isotopes and even various other aspects are there. So for non-power, peaceful purposes, nuclear energy is being used right now. On the other hand, licensing and safety oversight has been increased, where the nuclear energy board here, when we talk about the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, has been given powers with reference to even regulating the private sector. On the other hand, if there are some disputes due to the operation of the nuclear power plants, there is an Atomic Energy Redressal Advisory Council. So this will be looking into the various grievances or the complaints, and if there are some issues which has not been solved by the government organizations in the nuclear energy sector, if you have some issues with the orders and the judgments of their organizations, you can actually have an appeal. That appeal will lie before the Appellate Tribunal for Electricity. This you have to just keep in mind for your prelims examination. It is not Appellate Tribunal for nuclear energy. It is for electricity. Why? Because we already have this tribunal which is looking into the disputes which are coming from solar energy, which is coming from wind energy or coal or thermal power plant energy. So here, since we also will be generating electricity, that's why we have included nuclear energy also under the appellate tribunal for electricity. On the other hand, there will be a nuclear damage claims commission to actually understand in case of unfortunate events what will be the total damage, and in cases where some other foreign countries will be affected due to those unfortunate events of nuclear accidents in India. So India will be liable to pay that foreign country. For example, due to some, say, event, maybe some nuclear power plant in West Bengal has some unforeseen events, and that reactor and those radioactive substances have traveled way into Bangladesh. So India has to compensate Bangladesh for that. This is where comes the new draft rules. Now, whenever we have any act in the country, not only this one, the act is, a central act. It is passed by the parliament where the major provisions are there. Now, there would be various sub-provisions, right? This is why rules are framed under various acts. So, based on any act, you can understand that there are so many rules. The same has happened here. So, right now, the rules say that we have to supply single composite license. Single composite license will be given to the private sector with reference to any land agreements, with reference to any plant agreements. So it means that if you are someone in the private sector who wants to invest in our Indian nuclear energy sector, you need not go to various departments and ask for various permissions. One complete license will be there. Also, there will be in principle approval before you get the safety license. Say, for example, you are again a private sector. You want to set up a nuclear power plant, but yet you did not get the safety license from the central government, right? Now, can you go on to plan what would be the nuclear power plant be like, or what would be the very provisions, what will be the coolers and the various other provisions? So this is where the government has told that, okay, before even you get the safety license, you can start with the plan, so that there are less amount of delays. Also, the reactor design must be certified and already operational in its country of origin. For example, here, a French company would like to come in India and would like to set up nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu, right? So, the government has told that since you are a French company, you must already have some nuclear power plants operating in France. So, the design, all the safety features, all of those things must be intact if you want to set up a plant in Tamil Nadu also, right? So, this means that the quality also stays intact. On the other hand, intellectual property rights, whenever, for example, this French company is coming to Tamil Nadu. Now, definitely, this is one French nuclear-based company. So, they have their own new technology, own fancy gadgets and everything in nuclear power plants. So definitely their own intellectual property rights should be protected, their own patents should be respected. That also has been given. And finally, this provision of nuclear liability fund has been approved, that if the damage, we already have discussed this, that if the damage crosses 1,500 crore, then the central government will be committing up to 300 million SDR, special drawing rights, under the IMF. So you can already understand that if the private sector is actually having a liability of around up to 1,500 crore liability, right? So after that, the government will be coming in to provide the excess funds. So this was actually the main context of the Shanti Act and the liabilities and the draft rules that came in. Now these draft rules are actually under consultation. You will see that over a period of time, there will be so many criticisms, there will be so many support. Now this is where you come in. So this is where, as a bureaucrat, we always have to remain neutral. We have to understand that if the draft rules are there, there can be issues also. So this is where we have to appreciate that we have to do more. We have to include more provisions. For example, Niti Aayog had recommended earlier that we have to separate the front end and the back end operations, where this can serve as a PPP model. Imagine one thing, that in Tamil Nadu, a nuclear power plant is being set up. So there are two kinds of operations which can be done. Firstly, the central government can look into the high risk capital intensive work like procuring the land. Land acquisition is a very big deal, right? Or, talking about the transportation aspects such as improving the logistics, having better ports so that the uranium supplies come in safely. So these all heavy tasks, heavy infrastructure needs a lot of investment. This is what we know as front-end infrastructural needs of the nuclear energy sector. On the other hand, the day-to-day operations, the expertise, the technologies, the funds that can come from the private company. So this is what a PPP model looks like in the nuclear energy sector. This is what is missing from this draft. Also, the Tara-Porewala committee recommended that the AERB, right, the regulatory board, should be replaced by the NERDC, right, so that this would be a separate body not only talking about the safety aspects but also about the various other quality standards, plus also bringing in private investment and so many other aspects. So this is where we actually had seen that NERDC is a kind of a proposed body. Firstly, we have to make it a reality and we have to make it a multidimensional body. Third, we have to pivot to small modular reactors. Instead of actually setting up big plants which actually also has huge costs, big nuclear power plants, we can actually go for small modular reactors which look like this. Imagine that this is you and this is what a small modular reactor looks like. So you can already understand this is highly portable, right? This is modular. This means that you can actually deassemble it and assemble it at any place that you want, right? And also there is easier licensing. Production times are reduced, costs are reduced. You have the flexibility to choose that where you will be installing it, so that more of the state governments can actually spend money under it. So we need more of them, and also they are actually less risky in some areas also. Now, on the other hand, we recently have seen that India and Australia signed a nuclear agreement deal where uranium will be supplied to India by Australia, because Australia is one of the world's largest uranium producers and suppliers, due to which we need such more similar sovereign agreements that India and Australia are sovereign entities. So the Indian government should be taking care of the front end aspects. We talked about this. So one of the front end aspect is guaranteeing the fuel supply. Nuclear fuel is a very sensitive thing. Now, there is one more angle to this, one more angle of sovereign fuel supply apart from only partnering with other countries. Also look within our own country. We have a lot of thorium reserves. Also, you have understood that we have a 3-stage nuclear program. Now, this 3-stage nuclear program here talks about uranium use in the first stage, enriching the uranium in the second stage, and also including our naturally found thorium and enriching it in the third phase, so that finally we can use the enriched thorium with more thorium resources from the country directly in the third stage. So this is where India is right now talking about this aspect also, so that we become less dependent on other countries' uranium and focus on enriching thorium, which is already available in abundance in the monazite sands in our country. And finally, the most important thing right at the end of the day is what would be the cost of the nuclear power, right? We have to understand that electricity can be distributed via coal thermal power plants, solar energy, wind energy, and n number of sources. Apart from that, we also have nuclear energy right now. So what would be the governing formula for setting up the nuclear power plants and fixing the prices? Because at the end of the day, mainly we would need nuclear power plants for fulfilling the urbanization plus increasing amount of tier 2, tier 3 cities all across the countries. Also, we have AI data centers come up, which we already told that we need 24/7 uninterrupted power supply. So, there are two ways to do this. Firstly, nuclear energy can be given to the state thermal power plants, right? And they can transmit it to the electricity grid, where this can operate on a market price basis. I mean, market forces of demand and supply will be setting the price of the nuclear energy electricity. On the other hand, AI data centers, and even there will be some industries who would say that I will myself construct a nuclear power plant. And what I will do with that? I will only use it in my own AI data center. Or if Tata is building one in the steel sector or in their own steel industries, they will say that I will use my nuclear energy in only my steel energy sector, right? Because I want to decarbonize my steel production. So these are actually what we know as captive nuclear power plants. So here the government of India must understand that there are two ways of going this. Firstly, the consumer part, where for urban India, for tier 2, tier 3 and also some parts of the rural India, we need electricity from nuclear energy which can be fixed on a market price basis. On the other hand, we can have separate pricing mechanism for the captive power plants in nuclear energy. So this is what we understand by these rules right now. Let us see what the government will come up. But till then, you can write an answer right now, na? So do that. And right now we will move on to the mains value addition sector, where we have a news in the very first one, which is regarding the proposal which was floated that we would have a data center project on the Andaman and Nicobar Island. But right now this proposal has been cancelled. So firstly, understand some aspects of a data center. Here you can actually draw this diagram in your mains answer, and this is why I include such diagrams also, which are actually easily recreatable in your mains answer. Just draw a building where you will be showing that there are fuel storage tanks, there are so many server halls, right, which is consisting of various graphical processing units, or those graphics card which you actually played GTA 5, because GTA 6 won't come anytime soon, na? Also, rooftop cooling units will be there, because if you are using a lot of GPUs, you would require a lot of water or various other cooling techniques, right? Also, on the other hand, you need one power source of electricity, right? Because who will be fueling these huge data centers, which is consisting of, if not millions but thousands of GPUs. So this kind of project was proposed on the Andaman Nicobar Islands. And if you also have been following the news, the Great Nicobar Island project, it was opposed due to what? It was opposed due to the installation of so many services such as airports, ports, and so many other transshipment corridors, which would affect the natural ecosystem of the region. Imagine that you are setting up this in the Andaman Nicobar Island. So this is exactly why this proposal was withdrawn only weeks after it was proposed. So why this was done? Firstly, appreciate one fact that the government of India tried to project this as a green AI data center. Why? Because the government told that based on the cooling units, we will use seawater. And we will use that seawater which will be heated also as a part of the desalinization process, so that we can remove the salt, and we can then supply that water to the citizens which are living in the Andaman and Nicobar Island, so that they can also get the drinking water. So imagine you are getting drinking water from seawater which has been used to cool down an AI data center in the Andaman Nicobar Islands. But there are some issues also, due to which this project has been cancelled. Firstly, you know that AI data centers will be leading to deforestation, which will be clearing a lot of trees, leading to the loss of biodiversity, which already you know that Andaman Nicobar Island is a part of the Sundaland biodiversity hotspot. Can you tell me one other major country which is also involved in this Sundaland biodiversity hotspot? If you can, please mention all the countries which are involved here. Now, one aspect that we are ignoring with reference to this cooling thing is that when we talk about the cooling sector, it involves a lot of energy. That means the wastewater would be very hot, and that would be dumped to the sea and the ocean. And this is what will disturb again the local biodiversity, because it would change the temperature of the seawater, which will be actually be making the life of the sea surface organisms very difficult, even lead to the loss of the coral diversity. Also, land use is there by clearing forest, right? This will lead to a lot of displacement of the local tribal population, such as the Nicobaris people and also the Shompen tribes, right? And also this will invite a lot of other sections of the population to go and settle in the Andaman Nicobar Island, again posing a huge threat to the particularly vulnerable tribal groups which are actually not in contact with us, or say with the mainland practices of the country for, if not thousands, but hundreds of years, right? So this is why we have to protect them, and these were the value addition points. Now in the second one, now this is one article which whenever I read I actually become very disturbed, because the same forces which protect and have the responsibility for the internal security of the country, they are themselves committing suicides in the recent times. Now if you look at the subsequent years from 2021, 2002, 2023, 4, 5, we see that the suicide cases are at the range of 40 to around 60. As of now in 2026, you will be shocked to know that already around 19 suicide deaths have been recorded, right? And in fact it is more than that. And most of the suicides, they take place among the lower ranks. 80% of suicide take place among the lower ranking CRPF personnel. Also 77% of the CRPF personnel commit suicide while they are on duty. Why? Because obviously we know that they have some deputations which are actually high stress, and they live in conflict prone areas. They live mainly in our border areas or in areas, say, within our country where we have insurgencies, right? Where they stay there for long years, where they on a daily basis work for long hours, and they have very severe work-life balance issues, right? Due to which they get very less leaves. And also when we talk about their family time, that is very limited. Sometimes they visit their families only 2 to 3 times in a year, and that is what also they see for only 2-3 days or 5 days or maximum a week, right? Because if they take more leaves, they will have career stagnation, right? And also there is very opaque amount of grievance redressal in the CRPF. So this is what in the recent times the government also has been taking some actions. For example, right now the CRPF has formed core group to review the self-harm cases because of the rising suicide cases. Apart from that, the National Human Rights Commission was also involved, where it sent letters to the Ministry of Home Affairs, plus also CRPF Director General, seeking the main causes of these drivers. Also, when we talk about the high-level core group, this will be looking into the various causes and investigation. Also, there are various talking circles which are set up. This is where the seniors plus juniors, everyone would come together to discuss their various issues. Also, the Ayushman CAPF is there, which is kind of a health insurance component for both the personnel plus their family. And finally, there is an informal Chopal system which also operates for elevating the various day-to-day struggles by talking to the seniors and various other personnel. So this was all for this mains value addition, which will be very important for your GS3 topic of the central security organizations and their mandate and their issues that they face, where you can include these as some points. Now, next, in the Hindu, in the editorial section, there is one very important editorial which is talking about one important question. Imagine that there is a forest. This is one forested area which is very huge in size. Now, what actually happens in real life, if there is a private sector person who would want to set up a resort in the middle of the forest, right, which is already a protected area, what these kind of private people do, they set up the resort and then they go for environmental clearance. On the other hand, you have to undertake a detailed project appraisal when we talk about environmental degradation. So if you are setting up a resort in this heavily dense forest, you need to take up detailed environment impact assessment, right, which is actually backed by the Environment Protection Act of 1986. But so many projects have actually started without even prior environmental clearances. So this was what plaguing various state governments, because firstly, as you know, under EIA, firstly, if there is a project which is coming up, say this resort which will be set up in the forest, firstly what we have to do, we have to screen the project, right? We have to understand what is the potential dimension of the project and how it will be negatively or positively harming the environment. Then there will be various experts who will be involved into going to that forest itself and understanding a detailed study, right? Then a draft report will be present. Then the public, I mean the local people also will be involved, and then a final report will be done. Then it will be accepted or rejected, right? So this is the entire stage. But there are some projects which do not carry on any stage at all. Firstly, they construct the resort, construct the hotels, or do various other illegal activities, and then they go for clearances, right? And most of the state governments, they also used to involve in corruption and let those projects continue. So in 2017, there was one time statutory window which was opened, that if you have started your project before taking an EC or environmental clearance, then one time window is there. Please apply to this window. The government will be studying whether this project is legal or illegal, and a decision would be made. But that is closed right now. And in 2021, the central government actually came up with another initiative known as the Office Memorandum, where the Supreme Court struck this down. Why? Because we have to understand that Environment Protection Act is one act which is trying to protect the environment, and this is passed by the Parliament of our country. But this Office Memorandum is something which is actually possible by the bureaucracy. Now, executive, we have to understand they are always accountable to the Parliament, right? So if the executive administration is involved in corruption themselves, how will they be protecting the environment, right? So this is why the Supreme Court has struck down the 2021 Office Memorandum procedure and advised that all of the projects should be going through a strict, stringent process of environmental impact assessment. So this is where this Vanashakti versus Union of India case comes into picture, where you can include this in GS2 answers related to environmental aspects in judiciary, and in GS3 where we have the topic of EIA directly as a part of your syllabus. So this judgment will be very important to actually advise the government or your examiner that any environmental clearances which are taken after the project should be deemed as illegal. So this is what I think is enough for the mains value addition pointers, and let us now move on to the prelims pointers. So the first one is actually a very basic thing, that is, what do you mean by a definition of industry? Now, like most things in our life which may seem very simple at the outset, but if you go beyond that it becomes very deep and complex, right? So this is what this article is also all about. On the beginning it feels that what is the definition of industry is a very simple thing, but there are actually various legal parameters that we have to keep in mind for both papers of GS3 and prelims. Now firstly, let us take an example of two friends. One is Ram and one is actually Ravi. Take it. Now both of them work as same professions. Both of them are automobile technicians. But Ram is actually working with a government PSU and Ravi is working at a private sector. But both their roles are same. Both they are technicians. Take it. Now, what do you think? Does the definition of industry apply to Ravi because he is just working in a private sector, or to both Ram and Ravi? Right? This is the main thing that we are going to discuss, because you know, in 1947 there was an act known as the Industrial Disputes Act, which actually gave a definition of industry, right, which was contested at the Supreme Court, because you know, definitions are never clear. That is why this case went to the Supreme Court. In 1978, Supreme Court ruled that any organization to be an industry, it has to fulfill the triple test. What does this mean? That any establishment which has systematic activity of production, I mean, you know, whenever we talk about this automobile sector, है ना? We try to produce various cars using a complex system. Okay. Also, this particular establishment is actually possible because of cooperation between employer and employee, right? So this is applicable to both Ram and both Ravi, है ना? Also, you have to keep in mind, this is the most important thing, that establishment, if it is involved in production or distribution of goods or services to satisfy human want or wishes, this is also an industry. Now, for example, both Ram and Ravi are employed in this automobile sector. Ram is in the government PSU, Ravi is in the private sector. But what are they producing? Both of them are producing cars. Now, will you agree with me that cars actually is kind of a production of a good? Cars also satisfy your human wants and wishes, है ना? So this was the main thing, because government actually for years have denied that government sector or PSUs or anything related to government is not an industry. But if you know, from 1950s we actually had a planned economy where the government went on heavy industrialization, where the government even took up the production of cars via the Hindustan Motors and so many other organizations to produce the mass produced goods and services, है ना? Sometimes heavy industries also. This means that the definition of industries, if the government is not accepting, so in cases of any disputes within the government sector, so the government would deny the various provisions which is given or protections which is given under the Industrial Disputes Act, because the government will tell, then I am a government, I am a welfare state, I am not an industry. So this is why this case went to the Supreme Court, and this is why the Supreme Court gave this triple test, right? Because there was actually so many state governments which were not accepting various provisions, benefits for some government employees. This is why there was a huge protest, huge amount of cases also which actually were imposed to the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court clarified that we have to clarify the roles of the government right now to arrive at the definition of industry. So there are some subjects such as law and order, defense of the country, judicial responsibility. So in these cases, the government is not producing any goods or services. Okay? The government generally actually serves as a welfare state via these reasons. Then only we have to accept that, okay, government is not industry for these sectors only. But if there is a government PSU who is producing a car or any other equipment or machinery or goods for basic human consumption or demand, then it would be a non-sovereign function of the government, because that same function can also be done by a private sector. And if a private sector can be classified as an industry under the Industrial Dispute Act, then the government non-sovereign roles of production and distribution, they also will be coming under that definition of industry, right? So this is what is the main aspect. So we have to separate here two things. The government argues that it is not an industry because it provides welfare services. Government also tells that there are so many charities which actually operate on low cost. And under Industrial Dispute Act, there are so many provisions that you have to provide for your laborer, employee, which actually includes cost of production or cost of doing business or cost of running the charities. So that is why government actually wants to exclude itself and the charities from the ambit of industries. Okay? But Supreme Court already clarified that the triple test must be done. From the triple test, we have to assure that if the government is fulfilling law and order, defense, all those things which are actually not done for profit, then you can tell that government you are actually in only these provisions, you are not industry. But in other provisions, you are actually an industry. So this actually case went on in the Supreme Court. Right now, the 7-judge constitutional bench delivered a split verdict. So in this case, the 4 judges who were in majority ruled in favor that before 2020, if there are any pending cases, that would fall under the 1978 Supreme Court triple test, right? But if there are some new future disputes, that would fall under the Industrial Relations Code 2020. This is actually part of one of the 4 labor codes which were brought in to increase the ease of doing business, right? So here the majority of the judges supported this logic. Now the dissenting judges, the 3 judges told that, There are various services in the government and even in the charity which purposely deny the benefits to their employees, seeking this welfare state and various other charity tag, right? So this is why we right now have to think about what is the way forward, what is the middle ground here. So firstly, let us go back to the second National Commission on Labour recommendation of 2002. It actually gave us the list of the sovereign responsibilities. So if the government is fulfilling these responsibilities, then only in these sectors the government is not an industry, and in the other sectors government is actually falling under the definition of industry. Now, the sovereign functions like defense, national security, foreign affairs, coinage, currency, minting, legislature, lawmaking, judicial administration, law and order, collection of taxes, state revenue management, these are actually not for profit. Okay, that is why these are the sovereign functions. Also, there is another recommendation that we have to create a third category of workers. This should be known as the public welfare workers. This can be temporary, this can be permanent workers, mainly from schemes like Anganwadi, Asha and midday meal staff. And finally, we have to have a mandatory notification of alternate mechanisms also, as to not only approach the courts, but how to settle the disputes outside of the court, right? So fast track courts should be set up and tribunals should be set up for these excluded workers and their welfare. Because at the end of the day, the workers' welfare is the most important parameter for the government. Now, let us move on to the next one, where we have a central government initiative in news known as the NAMASTE initiative. Now, this is one scheme for the vulnerable sections of the population, mainly for the manual scavengers of our country who still manually try to clean the various latrines, toilets, and even the various manholes, right, which is filled with litter and so much unhygienic conditions. So actually, to give them better benefits, this scheme was earlier known as Self-Employment Scheme for Rehabilitation of Manual Scavengers. The new name of the scheme right now is the National Action for Mechanized Sanitation Ecosystem, where profiling of various sewer septic tank workers will be done with reference to their detailed ID. Right, they will be trained on various safety aspects, also given PPE kits so that they do not come in touch with the various unhygienic conditions, right, at the toilets and the latrines, right. They also will be given coverage under Ayushman Bharat, livelihood support for skilling, and even if they want or if their future generations want to set up entrepreneurship, they will be given priority credit. Right, this is where we have to discuss about the main aspect of the scheme. Now, firstly, understand this is a central government scheme. 100% of the money is devoted by the central government. It is actually a partnership of two major ministries. Remember this very carefully. It is the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and Ministry of Urban Housing Affairs, not your Ministry of Health. Okay. And the main implementing agency is National Safai Karmachari Finance and Development Corporation. Now you will be interested into why there is Finance and Development Corporation involved here. Because this scheme has a sub-scheme known as a Safai Udyami Yojana. This is the main aspect of the scheme, where 50% capital support will be given to the workers or some worker organizations if they would want to buy some equipments or mechanized equipments which can actually eliminate the need for human beings to go down the gutters and clean them. This will be robots, machines which are actually highly popular in the countries which are much more developed than us. So from there we will be importing the machines. We also will be producing the machines in India and we will be selling them to the workers or the worker organizations, right? Also there can be very specialized trucks, robots such as Bandicoot. This robot looks like this. If you look at this particular machine, this actually has specialized equipment that can go underground and actually clean the surfaces, right? So this is the main support that is given, and also the rehabilitation of the manual scavengers have one statutory backing too. That is the Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act 2013. Now you will also be surprised to know one thing, that despite having the scheme, despite having the act, despite having so many finance assurances. India recorded 332 manual scavenging deaths in 2026, where Maharashtra, Haryana, Tamil Nadu, Delhi actually came in the top 5. Right? So this means that the scheme needs better implementation, better coverage. That is why right now the scheme has been expanded from the urban areas to the rural areas also. And also more people has been included, such as drain cleaners, sewage treatment plants, and also the fecal sewage treatment plant workers, right? The scheme and the target has been increased to around 2030-31. So this is what is all about this particular scheme. Now let us move on to the next, where from the context of these two articles, based on a mining project with reference to the state of Maharashtra and the relocation of villages with reference to Satkosia Tiger Reserve in Odisha, we will understand some of the most important ecological institutions and concepts. Let us start with National Tiger Conservation Authority. From the name itself, you know that it is actually a tiger conservation authority which was set up in 2005. And with reference to the recommendations of the NTCA, no boundaries can be changed with reference to any tiger reserves in the country. Right? Without their recommendation, tiger reserves boundaries cannot be changed. And finally, the National Board for Wildlife is there, who will be there for recommending the increase or decrease or boundaries of tiger reserves. Apart from that, they also devise the various tiger corridors in the country. Right? For example, you know that wild animals do not stay limited in only one forest for their entire life. Especially tigers, which are highly mobile organisms, they would love to go from one forest to another, mainly in search of prey. But what happens if, say, major forested areas are actually separated by urbanization, villages, irrigation canals, roads, tourism resorts, and so on? So if you see these yellow dots or yellow places which are actually in Maharashtra, these are separated across each other. Right? So how the tigers will move through them? So this is where the concept of tiger corridors come in, which are actually green patches, right, which continue the movement, gene flow, and long time survival of the tigers. Right? So this means that under the Wildlife Protection Act, right, tiger reserves plus the areas linking one protected area with the other, right, must be denoted in public interest, also in recommendation and consultation with National Board for Wildlife. Here the NTCA also plays a very, very important role, because mainly there are various experts with reference to tiger conservation, environmental experts, which are involved as part of the NTCA. Right? Also, the Tiger Conservation Plan is one plan which the NTCA is entrusted with. Now, let us talk about the main context of this article here. So, in Maharashtra, there are some projects which are coming up. Now, the main concern is that the projects are directly inside the tiger reserve boundaries and borders. Right? So, this is where the Bombay High Court told one petitioner who complained against this that please go to the NTCA and appeal there, right? Because the main jurisdiction, expert authority, and all of those things are actually under the NTCA, right? Now, this is one 937 hectare mining project which can impact the tiger reserve, right? So this is where, the activists have urged the NTCA to reconsider some concept that we know as the least cost path model. Now, least cost path model are actually advanced complex, mathematical plus ecological models where we try to understand the patterns of the tiger behavior. Imagine that there are many tigers in this area. Okay? Now what will happen? Tigers can easily move through this area if we have dense forest cover, water streams, and good prey density. Right? So if we have some natural areas which already fulfill such conditions in this area, then that means that these are the least cost model. That means if already some areas are having this feature, we do not have to spend extra money for the conservation, right? Or we should not be diverting this land to developmental projects, right? On the other hand, usually what happens, we have steep terrain, highways, human settlements, deforested areas, which increase the cost of our conservation and also leads to the increase of cost on the lives of the tigers. Right? So this is what we have to keep in mind regarding the conservation of tiger and such projects which go on. Correct? Now, let us come to the next news. This is from Odisha. Now, the Odisha government recently set up a high-level inquiry committee to understand how the villagers have been relocated from the Satkosia tiger reserves, because there have been allegations that they have not been given compensation with reference to the displacement from their ancestral houses. Also, this tiger reserve is often in the news. Why? Because there are 0 tigers right now found. As of the latest 2022 tiger conservation census, there are no tiger reserves which are found in this area. Now, let us talk about a little brief about the Satkosia Tiger Reserve. This actually is a very unique tiger reserve because it is at the meeting point of the Deccan Peninsula and the Eastern Ghats. UPSC prelims loves to ask this kind of questions. Also, the Mahanadi River passes through a 22-kilometer long deep gorge here. And mostly, another interesting feature is that we find the mugger crocodiles and the critically endangered gharials in the area. Now, when we talk about these villages were displaced away from their homes without giving a compensation. Now, do we have any law or mechanism in India to actually guarantee them justice? Yes. We have the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 and the Forest Rights Act of 2006. Both of them govern the rules of village relocation. So, you have to be very careful in your prelims if this question comes. So, it is a concept of natural justice only that state agencies should consult with independent experts and scientists to understand how many villages should be displaced if a new tiger conservation project is coming up. So definitely if a new project is coming up, some villages will be displaced, but they should be given compensation because we are talking about their ancestral lands and their traditional values. Also, relocations cannot be forced. They must be gained through the consensus of the Gram Sabha, who would be talking to the local people. Then there should be a consensus, right? Not a voting agreement, right? There should be a consensus. All the villages, they must agree, right? Also, there is one aspect is that coexistence between humans and tiger is impossible, right? So for centuries, we have understood that many people actually lived in conjunction with nature, right? So there has to be one careful study if this coexistence is feasible or not. And finally, the Forest Rights Act comes into picture with reference to the rights of the land. Right? On the other hand, there are some basic terms also. Under Wildlife Protection Act, there is one term that is known as critical tiger habitat. And this is why, coexistence between human and tigers seem to be impossible because this actually is one area where tigers are found in most amount of density. So based on life safety and other parameters, those rights can be given. On the other hand, critical wildlife reserve actually is under the Forest Rights Act, which was also asked in your 2018 prelims question. If you can look into the statement number 1, this is one statement regarding the critical wildlife habitat, right? So, if you know the answer to this question, please do let me know in the comments below, because this question is also talking about the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and this is one scheme regarding them. So please do let me know the answer in the comments below. And now move on to the last article, where we will try to understand recently why India's core sector growth has fallen down to 5.4%. So firstly, let us understand from absolute basics. Earlier there was this index of 8 core industries. Right now, in this year itself, the index of 8 core industries has been expanded to include the 9th sector, that is iron ore. Now, why we are talking about these 9 industries? Because these are considered to be the most important industries when we talk about India's economic growth. Firstly, consider coal, natural gas, crude oil, refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement, electricity, iron ore. These are all used on a day-to-day basis for India's economic growth and development. Talk about the industrial sector, talk about the construction sector, talk about anything that you can visualize in the country. the performance of these sectors become very important. So on a monthly basis, we try to calculate what has been the growth across these many 9 sectors. So that is why this measurement is done by the Government of India under the Office of the Economic Advisor, under DPIIT, under the Ministry of Commerce and Industries. Now, there is one similar index also which we covered in the Analyst recently also. That is known as the Index of Industrial Production. Do not confuse Index of Core Industries with Index of Industrial Production. These are different, right? The base year in both of them are same, but IIP actually has 4 broader sectors. Manufacturing, having a weightage of 76%, mining and quarrying, electricity and gas supply, and water supply, sewerage and waste management, right? So this is where we have these sectors, and the index of core industries are having 9 sectors. Accordingly, in your notes, please do arrange the sectors according to their weightage. For example, please do arrange from electricity onwards in a descending order of weightage, right? Now, finally, when we talk about the July 2026 data, firstly, we know that these geopolitical issues are going on, due to which fertilizer, iron ore, steel sectors are suffering. Even crude oil, natural gas sectors have seen a slowdown, because if see, fertilizers, iron ore, steel sectors, natural gas, crude oil, these are almost 4-5 sectors within the total 9 sectors. If they are showing a slowdown, definitely the entire sector also will be showing a slowdown. And this slowdown is nothing dramatic maybe, because over the last 2 years we have seen such upswings and the downswings in this index of core industries, right? So this was all. Finally, you have one pre-YQ. Please do let me know what is the answer in the comments. And at the end, I thank you all for being a very patient audience. Please do attempt the quiz which is following up. Until we meet again, all the best and best of luck. Thank you.